Hello and welcome to Dialogue. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has wrapped up a 5-day visit to China, where she met with top Chinese academic, political, and financial leaders in Guangzhou and Beijing. High on her list of topics was the accusation of so-called China's production overcapacity in green technologies, and the U.S. fears that the Chinese exports could harm its interests. So what is overcapacity? Is there an overcapacity issue in China? Is the U.S. overreacting to China's successful green technological development? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Zhao Hai, Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy, Weiwen, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Paul Gillis, Professor of Accounting at Beijing International Studies University. Welcome to Dialogue. Zhao Hai, I will start with you. So this is the second trip by Secretary Yellen in less than a year's time. So what is the significance of this, the timing, the visit, and what do you make of her visit?
Well, I think there's no specific meaning of her meeting other than this is a follow-up meeting to the San Francisco summit. After that, I think two countries have made a lot of arrangement for high-level officials communicating with each other and keep the communication channels open. And I think Janet Yellen's visit shows that the importance of China-U.S. financial economic relations, and she, as the leader of the U.S. side, keep talking with the Chinese side and discussing important issues between the two countries is a very important part of that dialogue. And that shows that China and U.S. continue to make progress under the two leaders' direction, particularly after the recent call between President Xi and President Biden. And I think after that, there will be other high-level officials from the United States coming to visit China, as well as Chinese officials visit the U.S. Fundamentally, this is the effort to maintain stable relations between the two countries, particularly in this election year in the United States.
Mm-hmm. So keeping the relations stable and also keeping the channels open, that's more significant in terms of the visit. Professor Paul Gillis, what are your takeaways from Secretary Yellen's visit here?
I think what it reflects is the United States and China both want to try to keep the relationship alive. I think it was headed in the wrong direction for quite a long time, and I think they're both hopeful to keep things on an even keel until after the election.
All right, stability, and of course, if you look at the topics, during her stay in China, there are quite a few, of course, and so. Mr. He, so what do you think have been probably the key issues raised by Secretary Yellen and probably also concerning the Chinese side too?
Oh yes, of course. Secretary Yellen has said that her latest trip to China was quite successful, fruitful. I mean, she concluded in 3 different aspects as achievements. However, she also raised the great concern of the overcapacity of China's industry, especially the new energy industry, and the solar panel, electric vehicles, and lithium cells. And she also said blamed China for industrial policies subsidizing the industry, and so as to make Chinese products too competitive in the world, and comparing the European and the American companies unable to survive. So that's her main target for convincing Chinese government to make changes in these respects.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there are substantial agreements, like both sides agree to work with each other, such as fighting the money laundry, across national borders, etc. So maybe that's a very positive sign of the two countries to work together in the areas that they feel comfortable. Mr. He?
Oh yes, I think they are doing the right thing in the right direction. And they think that because Janet Yellen is the Secretary of the Treasury. Her duties is covering the macroeconomic management and monetary and finance affairs. So her focus when talking with the Chinese finance ministry is focusing on the macroeconomic policies and also U.S.-China coordination supporting the balanced world economic development. Also, cooperation on the world financial stability, including fighting the financial money laundering and so on and so forth. That is all necessary to keep a healthy financial environment of the world so as to sustain the world economic recovery and development.
Yeah, that's had a lot to do with the size of the two economies, of course, the two largest economies in the world. Of course, their cooperation in this respect is critical. Professor Gillis, ahead of her trip to China, Yellen basically talked about what the U.S. calls excess of Chinese production in the green technology sector, EV, lithium battery, of course, solar panel, etc. Tell us, seems overcapacity is a keyword of, or one of the keywords of her visit to China. Tell us, is there a definition? What is overcapacity? Is there a, classical or widely accepted definition of overcapacity?
I don't know if there's a widely accepted definition, but it's quite clear what is meant by overcapacity is the ability to produce more than the market can absorb, which would tend to result in an oversupply, which will result in reducing prices and reducing profits. Now, China is in part a victim of its own success. China had an industrial policy that identified those areas as important to the future economy and invested in making sure that those businesses in electric vehicles or in electric vehicles and batteries would be in solar panels would be done at scale and done early. And now China is able to produce these products at a very high quality at a lower price than many others who are trying to enter the market late, and that makes it difficult for them. And China could freeze them out of the market.
Professor Gillis, if you look at the response from the Chinese side, they quoted this figure here. According to the International Energy Agency's estimates, the global demand for new energy vehicles will reach 45 million units by 2030. That would be 4.5 times that of 2022. The global demand for new photovoltaic installations will reach 880 gigawatts, approximately 4 times that of 2022. So current production capacities are far from meeting market demand. People say it's really about which market in terms of meeting the demand of the market. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I think that many countries around the world have underestimated the conversion to electric vehicles that we're seeing underway right now. And there's certainly political opposition to it in many parts of the world by those who are either tied to fossil fuel approaches or those that simply want to resist any kind of change, because the view that it's a more liberal approach than they're comfortable with.
Well, Zhao Hai, of course, others would argue, this is the market economy. If you look at the Chinese market, there are, dozens of, some would say almost 100 EV companies here. They're competing with each other vehemently in being more innovative, being, or producing better equipped cars with a lower price, more competitive prices. Is there anything wrong with that?
Well, I think to use the word overcapacity is completely wrong, and it's the fundamental issue here is competition, and the U.S. side is fear of competition with China in many of those new developing areas, including EVs and batteries and things you mentioned. So the U.S. is approaching this from two angles. One is Janet Yellen, Secretary Yellen's angle, which is that China has an overcapacity problem, which means that China's aggregated demand is not enough consume most of the products produced domestically, therefore China exporting to other countries with low price, and that's flooding other countries with cheap products. That means China needs to solve this problem domestically from its own policies. But then there's another angle, which is Jack Sullivan's National Security Advisor Sullivan's angle, which is saying that there's an energy national security problem, which means if China controls the supply chain of the EVs and batteries, that will create the same level of national security problem for the United States, equal to the oil crisis in the 1970s and the natural gas crisis in 2022. So I think in both cases, these are just excuses to shield American industries that the U.S. is using industrial policy to prop up and to basically protect its own domestic industry. That's one reason. Of course, there's an underlying, another hidden reason, which is U.S. election. We all know that Michigan and other industrial states in the United States is the battleground states, and Biden needs to win those states, and he needs the votes of the big automobile industries, including their manufacturing working jobs, those votes, and therefore shielding and keeping Chinese competition outside of the United States is essential to getting those votes. So at this point, I think it's very unconvincing to use the word overcapacity to accuse China to produce more EVs in this area. Just like you said, actually, there's more demand than supply in the world, and that's why Chinese cars are so popular. EV cars are so popular. So at the end of the day, I think we need to have that's why we need to have a dialogue to make sure that the intentions is right and the solutions is right. Otherwise, it will only keep and delay the timing of green energy and new industrial capacity to solve the problem of global climate change. And that's one of the reasons, actually one of the areas that Democrats and President Biden is supporting. So they're having a self-contradicting policies with themselves and also towards China. So that's why, from Chinese perspective, it's not making any sense.
Mm-hmm. Professor Gillis, you think the auto workers union important to Biden in states like Michigan, because of this is election year, of course, candidates like President Biden and Trump, of course, they will compete to be tough on China, to have this policy to protect the workers' interests, for example. So there's an element of political consideration here.
Yes, absolutely. I think politics is playing a big part in all of this, and it makes it very difficult to reach a solution. And I don't think anything can be really done until after the election. I think everyone was surprised that we did not see a significant change when Biden came in. We thought he would reverse most of Trump's policies, but he did not do so. And but I think right now the sentiment in America is very anti-China, and I think there's a great desire among U.S. politicians to prevent another occurrence like we saw when so many manufacturing jobs left the United States and went to China, and they don't want to see that happen again. Even though it may be those jobs never even get created if China wins the market in new industries such as EVs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point. We'll get back to that probably. Mr. He, in a market, if you follow the laws of the market, of course, however competition or fierce the competition, how fierce it is, the good thing is like you will have a better price, you have a better quality products. And if they produce something that cannot be sold, the company probably will go bankrupt. That's the law of the market. And is there overcapacity issue? Even there is, probably that's the overcapacity of the individual companies. Why should the U.S. be concerned with that?
I think the overcapacity issue of EVs, especially regarding China, should not be proposed by the United States, because China's EV has no threat at all to the U.S. market. If you look at the trade data, you can find that China's automobiles export to the United States last year was minimal. And spare parts of automobiles was exported from China to the US was only $18.5 billion, less than 4% of the US market. So how could China pose a threat to the US workers and the industries? And the total China's export to the United States in 2023 was 110 billion dollars less than 5 years ago, 2018. So China's export to the US was decreasing all the time. So how could China pose threat, especially EVs? I think this is important for Secretary Yellen because she echoed what the echoes of the United States in the U.S. political ecology, especially in the election year, that China poses a threat to U.S., hurting the American workers and industries. That's the political correct. So she proposed that and talked that to China. But that is not the right solution. The right solution is China, U.S., the automobiles industry, especially in the EV industry, should cooperate. Because we also see that the CATL, China major leading China's EV cell company, also had good supply contracts with American companies, supplying the cells to the United States and making both win. That's a good solution.
Well, you mentioned about cooperation rather than, let's say, the potential or the prospect of a trading war or tariff war, let's say, between the two economies. Now, I have this question for for you and also Paul probably here. That is, if you look at the 1980s, 1990s, the Japanese car industry, that was also perceived as a threat to the U.S. industries. The solution is to have Japanese companies invest in the United States and create jobs and also pay taxes. So that's a win-win solution. What's the likelihood of opening the door for the Chinese investors in the EV in the United States, Mr. He? Mr. He.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I was.
Go ahead.
I think the case of Japan in the 1980s provided a very good example. In the early 1980s, the U.S. automobile industry could not compete with the low-priced Japanese cars, especially after the oil crisis in the 1970s. So the U.S. government had no other choice but to have quantitative restrictions on the Japanese cars. That's automotive. That's later. So the Japanese car makers had no other choice but to invest in the United States. In the time, during my service in San Francisco in late 1990s, Toyota was the largest car makers in North America. So that's a win-win case. The Japan won and the American won. So I think China and the United States could also have the similar pattern, that the United States should welcome Chinese automotive, especially EV producers, to invest in the U.S. and so as to create jobs and also push up the industry in the United States. But the problem, I think, in the United States and Biden administration, the concept is not employment, jobs. The concept is national security. They said China's investment in the EVs in the United States will create a serious national security issue. So if that is created this narrative, it will disturb the whole picture.
Okay, so Professor Paul Gillis, what are the chances of having the Chinese investors doing investment in the U.S., creating jobs, etc.? Or is there more likely that they will be seen as a successful Chinese company, the Apple, TikTok, as long as it's a Chinese company, that's a threat to the U.S. security?
I think that is the general attitude right now, and I think that will make it difficult for that solution to work as well. I mean, Japan was an ally when Japan built its plants in the United States, and China is not viewed as an ally of the United States at present. So I think it will be more challenging to just fix this problem by building some of these Chinese EVs in the United States.
Well, speak of that, Zhao Hai here is, if you look at the remarks by U.S. senior officials, so there's a, let's say, lack of consistency. Commerce Secretary Raimondo talked about, like a million Chinese cars running on the U.S. streets. Somehow Beijing could stop them all of a sudden, or the data issue. But now Secretary Janet Yellen is talking about overcapacity. So it seems like there are different either excuses or they have a different understanding of this issue. Anyway, somehow because of the political issues, the likelihood of cooperating with each other to solve this problem is not that strong.
Exactly. That's why this whole thing is, from an economic perspective, is a non-issue. It is a political issue. Because right now, as Mr. He has pointed out, that the U.S. is imposing 27.5% tax on Chinese cars importing into the United States. So that's why there's very limited number of Chinese cars exporting to the United States. And Chinese makers wanted to build factories in the United States, but because of national security concerns, the U.S. refused to even allow that. Even CLT, the battery company, wants to build a factory in Michigan, has met with political resistance from the Republican side. And also the Chinese manufacturers trying to get around that tariff by building factories in Mexico. And now the Biden administration is initiating an investigation in the Commerce Department against that effort. That means that even if Chinese makers make cars or parts in Mexico has become a national security problem because of the EV cars and other applicants has Chinese chips and Chinese technologies contained in it. As Secretary Raimondo has pointed out, that she's concerned about suddenly 3 million cars stop running in the United States. Even though from Chinese perspective, it's really ridiculous. However, I think that's the as Paul has pointed out, that's the political environment that is very poisonous environment right now going on in the United States, and particularly in Washington, D.C. And we know the Biden administration is under huge pressure from Congress, and particularly from those anti-China people in Congress trying to create new laws, even further restricting Chinese export to the United States. So I think without the right perception of China and without a right definition of national security, it's very hard to proceed to moving forward to have a win-win economic relationship between the two countries.
Well, Mr. He, of course, the Biden administration indeed raised the concern and also basically talked about the threat of more tariffs for Chinese EVs. And also Trump, the former president, the candidate of the Republican Party, also talked about imposing 60% or increasing the tariff by 60%. People are concerned whether there will be a new trade war between the two countries.
We have to wait and see. Watch the developments closely. And I do not quite believe in what Trump has said, because he might say this today, might say that tomorrow. And also when he said 60%, the real tariff rate might be 30%, because he was talking very casually, and we should not take them too seriously. However, I think the difference between Trump and Biden is clear. Trump is based on the commercial values. He is seeking for commercial interests, and Biden looks for more security and political purposes. So if we compare what the Trump administration did during the 4 years' time to China on trade disputes and trade suppression, and compared with what the Biden administration has been doing in the small yard, high fence, we could find out easily that the practice and the policy of the Biden administration is more dangerous to China.
Well, to be fair, Secretary Janet Yellen, did reiterate her stance against economic decoupling between the U.S. and China at least twice in China publicly. Professor Paul Gillis, why do you think Yellen repeatedly emphasized her opposition to economic decoupling between the two countries here?
I think there is a recognition that economic decoupling just simply would hurt both countries quite badly, and that the United States could not survive without China, nor can China survive without the United States. So they need to find a way to work together. And things were clearly headed on the wrong track, where we were moving towards greater conflict. And I think there's a recognition of that and a desire to try to smooth things over as best as possible in what's going to be some difficult times ahead as we deal with issues like TikTok and EVs.
Zhao Hai, tell us, is her view popular in Washington?
Well, I think at least her view is controversial. Some people, of course, particularly the business community that have large interest in China, will support her idea. And the economists know that the two largest economies in the world cannot decouple. It's not realistic. However, there's another group of people, like the former USTR, Lighthizer, has emphasized that he wanted to strategically decouple between China and the United States. So I actually believe that Trump, if elected, will go through with his promise adding tariffs against China, either 50, 60%, doesn't matter, because any higher tariff will dramatically reduce the trade between the two countries. So we're facing real danger moving forward. And I think after visiting the business community in Guangzhou and in other part of China, Janet Yellen must hear the real voice from the ground that the U.S. business really need Chinese market, and China also need the U.S. market. So this is, I think, a very difficult time, and hopefully her voice, or a very rational voice, will prevail in Washington, D.C. in the coming days. But I think that needs time.
Mr. He, looking ahead, do you think Yellen's recent visit has helped to pave the way for more exchanges and cooperation between the two countries?
Definitely, yes. We should say that although there are disputes and different opinions about the results and deliveries of what the Janet Yellen has resulted from her trip to China, we should say that this is correct steps in the right direction, followed by the course charted by the two presidents of China and the United States. That is San Francisco vision. The China and United States should sit together to have a dialogue mechanism so as to manage differences and avoid conflicts, so as to stabilize the relationship between the two largest economies of the world, so as not only to benefit the two countries, but also benefit the world. So this is, of course, we have the tremendous differences because we have the fundamental differences in the ideology and the value and so on and so forth. However, both countries feel that we have to cooperate. So that is the general big direction. Under this direction, we have to do hard work. And we have set up a mechanism, dialogues in different ministries, foreign ministries, the finance ministries, the commerce ministries, and different working groups working step by step. These are good steps towards the right direction. And of course, we have big differences, as we said. So dialogues, candid, straightforward, constructive is necessary. But dialogues are not enough. We have to shoot practical issues and get our work down to the earth base, so as to step by step move forward.
Yes,
and so
we
as
have
to keep the relationship
stop there, Mr. He. With that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.